As some of you are aware, I read a lot of Dave Green, the distributist, and recently he provided me with a framework for understanding a lot of discourse on social media. I'll use a few colloquial terms here so as not to get rooted in all the technical BS, but here's one of the main distinctions to be aware of. On the internet, there are generally two types of people: male-brained persons and female-brained persons. Now don't get confused here. This is not a transgender talking point where supposedly someone was born with the brain of the opposite sex. Now instead, what we're referring to here are cognitive and social styles that are attributed to males and females. The way it goes is that a female-brained person is social status oriented, they think in terms of emotions, and they understand power in terms of social approval, and they understand truth in terms of consensus. Male-brained persons, on the other hand, are object or abstraction oriented. They think in terms of action and consequence, and they understand power as an extension of physical strength and action circumstance. For male-brained people, truth is a matter of what is observable and what can be predicted via pattern recognition. Now, the reality we live in is that many Western men today, despite being men, are actually female-brained people. The reason for this is that much of modern education and youthful impressionism is all female-dominated. So we move on to a dialectic provided by Green, and he proposes that the mind of a female-brained person persists in a state in which the status quo, or the current order of things, is the only living idea. For this kind of person, it is difficult to conceive of a world where active debates or controversies exist that have any moral dimension to them, alternative to the current order. And this means if you ever try to introduce new ideas or philosophies to this current order, well, female-brained people will be primed to reject you by default, because the current order is, in their minds, something that always has been. By merit that any of your ideas are different from that of the current order, your ideas will come pre-disqualified. And the reason for all that is female-brained people prefer a society that is monomoral. They feel safe, believing there is zero ambiguity, and that the current definitions of what is good and what is evil cannot be changed. Female-brained people feel good knowing there are clear status hierarchies, and they enjoy participating in said hierarchies via virtue signaling and whatnot. Indeed, female-brained people are big supporters of the current order, and all new ideas will be judged on the basis of the current order. This is why even if you use all your male brain rigor to think of an idea that is philosophically sound, it's absolutely reasonable. If it is seen as any way oppositional to the current order, then anyone with a female brain will just reject it outright. Your new idea will not be entertained and it won't even be tolerated. Instead, it will be treated as a vector of disease or corruption. Female brain people believe that the only rational choice is to cast such ideas out and exclude them from the community before they can do any harm to anyone. Now, already you might be thinking of examples of this. I mean, if you're a right-winger, for instance, you say something like how we should unapologetically prioritize things like the formation of family, fertility, and cultural continuity of the people who created and sustained Western civilization, well, they'll call you a Nazi. It doesn't matter if your proposal sounds absolutely reasonable. The status quo that is governed by a progressive ideology, which has also governed much of our education for almost a century, will cast you out. You're anathema. Now, for how to navigate this female brain, Green has established a dialectical process by which new ideas are currently spread through feminine-style spaces, like the internet, for example. They're as follows. Stage 2, exclusion. Female brain persons typically react to a new idea or a new thing that challenges the current social order by immediately labeling it as bad, as icky, as dangerous, a contaminating threat that makes them feel unsafe. And they respond with swift exclusion of both the idea and anyone associated with it.
I don't know. See, the thing is, I'm in a position... I've been in this position a long time. It'll be 4 years this year. I've been in a position for a long time where no one will associate with me and most people hate me, so I can basically say whatever I want.
Showing little interest in nuance or any partial truths or any potential benefits of said new idea. And any male brain persons who adopt the new idea will face social ostracism, but many will continue exploring it privately for its practical advantages, such as resolving contradictions in the existing order. Over time, and through gradual attrition, low-status male-brain people will begin to openly embrace these new ideas, followed by higher-status ones, and eventually they will force acceptance when powerful male-brain people advocate for it. And at that point, any female-brain people's attempts at total exclusion will fail, leading them to shift toward isolation as their next strategy.
Based of True is a libertarian tard who is against far-right ideology, but Basic Logic has literally said in videos that far-right is basically our only way out of this mess. So how the fuck is Based of True a fan of Basic Logic if Basic Logic is one of those pseudo-intellectuals who doesn't like far-right shit? That doesn't even make sense. Everyone thinks it's a meme, man. They all think it's a meme. It's not a fucking meme. Sam Hyde being extremely anti-Semitic is not a meme. Basic Logic, being very right-wing is not a fucking meme. You subhumans. They actually believe the shit.
Stage 3, Isolation. At this stage, female brain people gradually tolerate the new thing or new idea. It's weird, it's creepy, it's a low-status indulgent practice by some male brain persons, especially if kept strictly from polite society and the current order, of course. They insist it remain private, out of the house, and on the down low, all to preserve social appearances. And what this creates is non-intersecting spheres where female brain people maintain respectable traditions, all the while male brain people debate the new idea in their own spaces. However, the practical advantages of the new thing or new idea, such as its ability to resolve any contradictions with the current order and deliver better results to society, makes its influence grow, drawing power into those grungy male spaces. And female brain people, feeling sidelined and humiliated, will eventually tear down the barriers themselves, invading these domains to reassert control, stigmatize the idea, or maybe they'll subvert it to conform with the current order. Stage 4. Subversion. In this stage, female brain people acknowledge that the new thing, or the new idea, is now part of public discourse, but respond with a heightened stress and erotic scolding. Think of bird hands. And they demand that good male brain people continue fully complying with the current order. But to avoid open confrontation or humiliation, they deploy passive-aggressive shit tests, either diluting or reinterpreting the new thing to neuter its distinct truths and make it conform to the old order, or denouncing its extremes and pushing it back into isolated spaces. Millennial Woes talks about this tactic employed, says it's when people purposely pretend not to understand things in order to confuse or frustrate any discourse about them. And at this point, there will be many opportunistic or peace-seeking male brain people who will be tempted to comply for status, for social harmony, or personal relief. But when they do yield, it resets progress. Because you see, subversion thrives in lightly held, fashion-driven, or feminine dialectical spaces, but ultimately fails against male brain people with deep convictions. People who refuse the frame, who stand firm, and who are willing to endure conflict. And when such committed resistance prevails, the shit tests will collapse. The new idea will become normalized in mainstream society, and after that, a cultural shift will occur. Stage 5. Debate and conciliation. At this stage, female brain persons have acknowledged that the new thing is good, and they call for friendly public conversations in order to resolve differences and promote harmony. In reality, however, this is not a neutral or open debate. The new thing has already demonstrated its dominance by surviving earlier attempts at exclusion, isolation, and subversion. But in female brain-dominated spaces, contradictory ideas cannot coexist indefinitely. One must prevail to restore clear, moral consensus and social rules. Thus, the public discourse becomes a performative, post-hoc ritual, more like an HR seminar than a genuine dialectic, in which female brain people will narratively align with the winner, and they reify what victory even means.
Now I'm thinking of like these sort of right-wing channels, the libertarian channels who keep courting the chuds when they don't believe anything the chuds believe. Like, that's grifting. Is that not grifting? You're gonna pretend that you have far-right beliefs as a joke just so that you can attract a wider audience who's, you know, sick of the woke shit. That is grifting, okay? I believe all the shit I say in my videos. All of it. I've never joked. I don't even know what a joke is.
And this is all to ease the transition to full normalization, all the while the current order is quietly phased out. And now we have reached the final stage, normalization. Female brain people have fully embraced the new thing as obviously superior and the new default, retroactively presenting themselves as having always supported it while framing all the old stuff as the bad old ways. They focus on celebrating its glorious triumph, showing a mild tolerance to any remaining holdouts, especially if they have conservative friends, or pushing for their exclusion or punishment otherwise. And this creates ample social climbing opportunities for any male-brained people, even if they falsely or verifiably adopted those ideas. They will become the new popularizers, the new apologists, and the new performers who expound on these new ideas' virtues in new, safe, and performative contexts. And now, through this process, the dialectical cycle completes, and society has fully absorbed the new thing, the new idea. And then all of a sudden, everybody forgets the prior resistance, and they establish this new order as the new unquestioned truth. And what's interesting to me about this dialectic is it adequately explains why nothing ever happens. Because the truth is, stuff does happen, but the process is always slow and plodding. Everything that happens does so to an extent that the world does indeed change, but it doesn't feel like it because it was always at a snail's pace. Now, I've decided to apply this framework to the anti-woke and cultural criticism sphere on YouTube and maybe other social media platforms like X. But ultimately, what I have determined is that most influencers who are popular on these websites are only so because they exist primarily as female-brained operators. And yes, despite the fact that some of their content subsists on surface-level male brain takes, ultimately an influencer's success stems from selectively and expertly borrowing raw male brain takes in order to keep their content fresh and engaging. But the trick is to selectively sanitize those takes based on group consensus. This is essentially why centrist libertarians are some of the key influencers on YouTube and elsewhere, because much of what they do is they do take some of the more extreme ideas from right-wingers or alt-righters and they say, you know, this is good stuff, but I'm gonna say this in some way that hides my power level. A good way to understand this topic is through the lens of something more colloquial. The term troll's remorse refers to a phenomenon where creators who initially build audiences through male-brained energy and provocative commentary, like edgy humor or zero-compromise cultural criticism, but they eventually experience some kind of feminine-induced social pressures, and that's where they begin softening or retreating from their earlier positions. Ian Joma, or iDubbbz, is a perfect example of this. In terms of Green's dialectic, troll's remorse represents the moment when an individual starts to feel the full weight of exclusion or isolation, and they instinctively fall into a position of safety within the current order. And so, as said before, what began as male-brained energy collides with the fear of status loss, of demonetization risks, or audience fragmentation. As the saying goes, happy wife, happy life.
She won't respect him. Because you can't respect somebody who kisses your ass. Just doesn't work.
And the result is often a gradual shift from objective reality to consensus reality. For all the flack that troll's remorse receives, deserved by the way, what should be generally acknowledged here is that it reveals that female brain dynamics ultimately do govern the field of the internet. Troll's remorse shows the limitations of an influencer who wants to perform edginess while retaining the flexibility to retreat into a consensus style when society pushes back. However, if we're going by the iDubbbz example even further, what I think his case shows is that genuine male brain know-how requires the courage to resist the pull into consensus reality and to continue to say what you really truly believe in, even when your authenticity comes at the cost of any social belonging. Someone like Sam Hyde is a perfect example of that kind of resistance.
But yeah, Tim just very strangely went extra out of his way to make sure that a comedian was not making money, which is kind of crazy, because comedy, like, you kind of rely on freedom of speech and just like a licentious, is that the right word, attitude of the public towards content. Like, even if someone's making something that you don't like, it doesn't really serve your interests to be like, oh, this shouldn't exist, and that's why, like, Dave Chappelle, Joe Rogan, these guys are all pro free speech, is because they know that their bread is buttered with the ability to go up in front of a crowd and say anything. So for Tim to be like a fucking Karen and talk to the manager about the show that he didn't like, it's just crazy. It's really crazy.
Now, this isn't to say we completely abandon creating some kind of a group dynamic, but what this needs to look like is a reconciliation between male-brained leadership and female-brained social cohesion. It requires communities that value the objective fidelity of the male brain, knowing it should always be situated above the status-boosting propensity of the female brain. Masculine energy and thought ought to thrive without the demand of feminine capitulation. But of course, that doesn't mean we do away with the feminine entirely. Instead, the feminine ought to act as the subordinate to the masculine. Ephesians chapter 5, 22 through 25. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband.